Change management. First of 2 webinars on this subject. I want to start by presenting you with the aims of these webinars. That is, to enhance your knowledge and understanding of change management models and the theories, and to describe the most popular change management models and theories, and to give an overview of the pros and cons of each. Change is a reality of life, and it's observed not just in our personal life, but also on the professional front. Managing change and learning to adapt to it takes time, energy, effort and training. And this is the reason why several learned individuals around the globe have come up with properly structured and defined models to manage change. In this, the first of 2 webinars on the subject of change management, I shall give an overview and describe 4 of the 8 most popular change management models that have been effectively and successfully applied to businesses and industries with the aim of dealing with transition and change. The second webinar will describe the remaining 4. Each of these change management models, theories and concepts helps define change management and adds something of value to our understanding of the overall process. However, at its root, change is about process and people. But even process is just about people doing stuff. So it's ultimately all about people and processes that work for people. Organizations go through various internal change processes throughout their normal life cycle, where leaders may create change-driving forces within the organization. For instance, some leaders initiate radical change that results in structural transformation through which they hope and attempt to revitalize the business. Let's give you an overview then of change management. It's a term that's used to refer to the change or transitioning of people, groups, companies and projects from one state to another. Mergers and acquisitions, new top management teams, and changing company dynamics because of reorganization and restructuring require organization to make significant changes, not only in strategy and structure, but also in their organizational culture and processes. When this term is applied to businesses and projects, it may refer to a process of transitioning the scope of the project in such a way that it can meet changing requirements and objectives. Change management involves the application of structured methods and a pre-planned framework so as to steer business from its current state to a desired state. The main benefit or advantage of the application of change management is that it helps to increase the chances of a business staying on its budget or schedule, and that, in turn, leads to a higher return on investment and a realization of benefits. Amidst high competition and a fast-paced world, it's important for every organization to move ahead by constantly bringing about useful and structured changes and adapting to new technology and methodologies to meet customer demand. However, in order to manage and change and implement change strategies, it's important to avoid instigating irrelevant or random methods and instead try to focus on a suitable plan of action. Change management is an ongoing process that takes time, expertise, dedication and effort to implement and run. It requires the involvement of the staff of the company and possibly external personnel. It will undoubtedly result in staff being affected by the changes. Before adopting one of the many effective and popular change management approaches and models, an organization must first decide why it needs the changes and how it will benefit from them. Let me introduce the first 4 most popular change management theories and models. As I describe each one, take note of any similarities and any significant differences in order to enhance your understanding of the process. I shall conclude by summarising the pros and cons of each of these. So the first of these is Kurt Lewin's change management model. And then we have the McKinsey 7S model. We have Kotter's theory, which is an eight-step process. And finally, for this webinar, nudge theory. Let's look first then at Lewin's change management model. It's one of the most popular and effective models that make it possible for us to understand organisational and structured change. The model was designed and created by Kurt Lewin in the 1950s, and it still holds value today. Lewin was a physicist and social scientist who explained the structured or organisational change through the changing states of a block of ice. This model consists of three main stages, which are unfreeze, change, and refreeze. By splitting the change process into these three stages, it's possible to break a large, unwieldy shift into bite-sized chunks, which account for both the processes and people in a company. Let's look at these stages in a little more detail. So the first stage of the process of change, according to Lewin, actually involves the preparation for that change. This means the organisation must get prepared for the change, and in doing so, acknowledge the fact that change is crucial and it's needed. It's all about weighing up the pros and cons. This phase is important because most people try to resist change, and we have to break this status quo. The key here is to explain to people why the existing way needs to be changed and how change can bring about profit and benefit them. This step involves an organisation looking into its core and re-examining it. Because the more we feel that change is necessary, the more urgent it is, the more motivated we will be to make the change. It also means analysing every step in human interaction for potential improvements, no matter how in-depth you have to go and how much you need to unearth. By doing this, you're helping to eliminate any existing bias and commonly accepted mistakes, such as poor processes. These poor processes result in poor performance and lost revenue. The problems are not necessarily the fault of design. Bad processes don't always come from poor process management, but they often evolve over time. This phenomenon is often referred to as the normalization of deviance, and was a concept developed by American sociologist Diane Vaughan. She developed this theory when looking at where conflicts, mistakes, and disasters find their roots, and she holds that the source of these phenomena lies in the environments in which they occur. In a 2008 interview, Vaughan stated that the social normalization of deviance means that people within an organisation become so much accustomed to a deviant behaviour that they no longer consider it as deviant, despite the fact that they far exceed their own values. Vaughan went on to describe how these deviant behaviours, or bad processes, not only cause problems, but remain hidden. Poor processes are not uncovered because they become so ingrained within a company and accepted by both the organisational structures and the company culture that they're no longer seen as deviant. A sobering and challenging thought. It's a specific problem of teams normalising these problems which makes the concept so potentially damaging. If a whole team has accepted something, then each individual effectively becomes blind to the problem. The normalisation of these processes can be assessed and analysed by outside eyes, which may mean that they're more able to spot the deviancy and stop it before it becomes too deeply embedded. As with all aspects of good management, communication is crucial. and in this case it's the key to fighting deviancy. Experts agree that it's important to prioritise building a culture of communication, honesty and improvement in order to catch and prevent normalisation of deviance before it sets in. In doing so, the experts believe that the answer lies in empowering employees to have control over their own processes and tasks, and to create a culture where questioning the perceived order is accepted. This gives the perspective needed to change the cause of the problems rather than just the symptoms. Unfreezing also applies to people's perception of the upcoming change and their natural resistance to it. Forcing sudden change only breeds resentment, so a team needs to be prepared for the new elements in order to let them take hold when they're finally deployed. Everyone needs to know what's wrong with the current process, why it needs to change, what changes are being suggested, and what benefits those changes will bring. This should help to convince them of the need to change and encourage them to stick to the new process. The second part of Kurt Lewin's model is change. And this is where the real transitional change takes place. Once everyone is prepared, it's time to deploy the changes and guide the team as they adapt. The process may take a while to happen, as people usually take time to embrace new happenings, developments and changes. At this stage, good leadership and reassurance is important, because these aspects not only help to steer forward the change in the right direction, but also make the process easier for staff or individuals who are involved in that process. Communication, support and education are vital to eliminate any difficulties in the transition and address problems as soon as they arrive. As such, there will likely be a need to provide any extra educational training that a team will require. For example, if the change involves switching a piece of technology, then the team need to know how to use it. Or, if there's to be a new marketing policy, the team need to be told what to read to learn about it. In any case, it's important to make sure that everyone has a place or person they can go to for support during this transition phase. This can be a regular meeting with their manager, a knowledge base they can refer to, or a mentor that's guiding them through the process. The person initiating the change should communicate regularly with all members of the team, or at least get their manager to do so. And this is primarily to listen to feedback, as this will quickly highlight any problems that need to be tackled. And the final stage of Kurt Lewin's model is refreeze. Once changes have been deployed, measured and tweaked according to the feedback, there's a need to refreeze the new status quo. This is vital to any change management model. Everything which has been done would be pointless if old habits resurface. Now that the change has been accepted, embraced and implemented by people, the company or organisation begins to become stable again. That's why the stage is referred to as refreeze. It's the time when things start going back to their normal pace and routine, and there's a sense of stability as employees get comfortable and confident with the acquired changes. However, this step requires the determination of the team to make sure the changes are used all of the time and implement them even after the original objective has been achieved. And to do so, we'll need to have regular reviews in order to check that the new methods are being followed. We find then that rewards are often given to those who consistently keep the new method and those who make a large effort to support and uphold the changes. As we've said, if feedback has been listened to and applied, this stage should be easier since the staff will have invested in the changes. They've helped to shape them, so it's more likely that they will want them to succeed. Beyond that, any documented process needs to be checked and updated, such as standard operating procedures. and all of these checks need to be upheld until the changes become habit. There's no set amount of time until this happens, but as long as the new state of things is measured and reinforced, eventually the habit will be set in stone. Let's look now at the second of the models to be presented in this webinar, and that's McKinsey's 7S model. McKinsey's 7S framework is one of the few models that's managed to persist, even when others have come in and out of fashion. It was developed by consultants Tom Peters and Robert Waterman when they were working for McKinsey & Company in the 1980s. And the basic premise is that there are 7 internal factors in an organisation that need to be aligned if it is to be successful. The McKinsey model is one that can be applied to almost any organisation or team affected in this issue, and therefore it can be used to help identify what needs to be realigned to improve performance or to maintain alignment and performance during other types of change. For example, it can be used to help improve the performance of a company, examine the likely effects of future changes within a company, align the strategy of departments and processes during a merger or acquisition, and it can help to determine how best to implement a proposed strategy. Whatever the type of change, restructuring, new processes, an organisational merger, new systems, a change of leadership and so on, the model can be used to understand how the organisational elements are interrelated and so ensure that the wider impact of changes made in one area is taken into consideration in others. If something within an organisational team is not working, the chances are that there is inconsistency between some of the elements identified by this model. Once the inconsistencies are revealed, work can begin to align the internal elements to make sure they're all contributing to the shared goals and values. With this method, the process of analysing where an organisation is at any given moment is worthwhile in and of itself. But by taking this analysis to the next level and determining the ultimate stage for each of the factors, an organisational team can really move forward. So, what are the 7 elements? Well, the first of these is strategy. It involves the development of a step-by-step procedure or future plan. The strategy needs to be formal enough to allow an organisation to move forward with purpose and gain or maintain an advantage over its competitors, and yet be flexible enough to adapt to changes without destroying the process. As such, when assessing strategy, there's a need to answer questions such as, what is the organisation's strategy? What are the organisation's objectives and how are they to be achieved? Structure. This relates to the way in which the organisation is divided, or the structure it follows. For example, who reports to whom. The organisation structure should be fairly simple to note down, since it's more tangible than strategy, but it is nonetheless important to double check with the organisation's teams, because unless the information is accurate, the effectiveness of changes will be neutralised. And questions to ask here might be, how is the organisation structured? Departments? Teams? What's the hierarchy? Who makes the decisions? And where are the lines of communication? Are they explicit or are they implicit? What are the systems then? The systems are the daily activities and procedures that staff members engage in to get the job done. Here, there's a need to assess an organisation's business systems, including the official processes, unofficial shortcuts, a little like that deviance I was talking about earlier, rules, and how everything is tracked. Are these systems accurate? Are they being used word for word? How are the results of these processes monitored and evaluated? What internal rules and processes does the team use to keep on track? Another element is shared values. These were called superordinate goals when the model was first developed, and these are the core values of the company that are evidenced in the corporate culture and the general work ethic. We're back into abstract territory now, as the next step is to analyse an organisation's shared values. This will typically include both official organisational values and the culture. While culture might seem irrelevant to managing change, if it's used correctly, it can be a powerful tool indeed. Linking values and culture to the proposed changes should make them more agreeable to the workforce, who should, in turn, adapt them more readily. Some questions that might be asked are, what are the core values? How strong are they? And is the team's culture at odds with that of the organisation as a whole? The next element is style. This is the manner in which the changes in leadership are adopted or implemented. This stage is all about assessing the management and leadership style used in the business. Now, while it might be tempting for management to present an idealised view of its own leadership style, this temptation should be resisted. And instead, a frank and honest appraisal should be made about how both the senior management and the rest of the organisation are managed, and how they manage others. The questions that need to be asked here are, how active and participative is the management leadership style? How effective is that leadership? And does the leadership style inspire competition or collaboration? Staff. This refers to the workforce or employees and their working capabilities. Here, there's a requirement to assess whether an organisation has the required positions filled, what gaps there are, and so on. Look at job descriptions, common tasks, and the skill set in general, and ask, what positions or specialisations are represented within the team? What positions need to be filled? Are there gaps in required competencies? The element skills is the competencies as well as other skills possessed by the workforce. Finally, it's time to look at the skills staff currently have. And this shouldn't end with a basic description. Gather some feedback about how the organisation is perceived, as this will give an idea of what the organisation's customers think those skills are, which are arguably just as important. In this case, ask yourself, do the employees have the necessary skills to do their job to the desired standard? How are the skills monitored and assessed? Are there any skills gaps? And how vital are any missing skills? You'll see from the diagram that shared values is in the middle of the model. And placing shared values in the middle of the model emphasises that these values are central to the development of all the other critical elements. The company's structure, strategy, systems, style, staff and skills all stem from why the organisation was originally created and what it stands for. The original vision of the company was formed from the values of the creators. As the values change, so do all the other elements. So these 7 elements, these interdependent factors, characterised as either hard or soft. Hard elements are easier to define or identify, and management can directly influence them. These are strategy statements, organisation charts, and reporting lines, formal processes, and IT systems. Soft elements, on the other hand, are much more difficult to describe. They're less tangible and more influenced by culture. However, these soft elements are important are as important as the hard elements if the organisation is going to be successful. The way the model is presented in the diagram depicts the interdependency of the elements and indicates how a change in one affects all the others. When using McKinsey's model, it's important to cross-examine your findings and find what changes need to be implemented. So it's incumbent to say that once the 7 S's have been analysed, time should be taken to think about how each affects the others. The task of deciding whether or not the 7 S's support each other will be down to the decision makers. For example, look at whether the organisational structure supports strategy, or how they're both helped by the systems, and how all three reflect the organisation's shared values. Once it's clear what needs to be brought into line, you need to plan out incremental changes which won't disrupt regular operations too much or alienate employees. After the incremental changes have been deployed, or even after every change that you make, it'll be necessary to go through the 7S model again to reassess and find out what needs to be done next. The 7S model can be used to help analyse the current situation, point A, a proposed future situation, point B, and to identify gaps and inconsistencies between them. It's then a question of adjusting and tuning the elements of the 7S model to ensure that an organisation works effectively and well once the desired endpoint is reached. The 7S model is a good framework to help ask the right questions, but it will not provide all the answers. For that to happen, there'll be a need to bring together the right knowledge, skills and experience. The appendix at the end of this webinar will provide more of the questions that need to be explored in order to understand and analyse the current point, that is the situation first, and then repeat the exercise for the proposed situation. Let's look now at Kotter's management theory. Now this is one of the most popular and adopted ones in the world. It was devised by John P. Kotter, a Harvard Business School professor and author of several books based on change management. The theory is divided into 8 stages, where each one of them concentrates on a key principle that's associated with the response of people to change. So Kotter's theory, therefore, focuses less on the change itself, and more on the people behind it, albeit from a top-down point of view. So how does a theory work? Well, it works by creating a sense of urgency among the staff in order to motivate them to move forwards towards the objectives. It's important to take stock of potential threats, what the organisation's competitors are doing, and opportunities that can be capitalised on, and then use them to start discussions with staff around the effects on the organisation and what should be done about them. You need to build a powerful guiding coalition. Get the right people on the team by selecting a mix of skills, knowledge and commitment. Be sure, though, to ask them specifically for a commitment to these changes too, since there'll be a need for a strong core of promoters who can reach every employee in the organisation. The next step is to form a clear strategic vision. But you don't need to just consider the strategy, but also the creativity, the emotional connection, and objectives. There's a need here to define the changes and the vision that's being aimed for. And the key here is not to overwhelm whoever's listening with detail or complicated ideas or language. Write down what values the proposed changes work towards achieving, what the changes are, and what the predicted outcome will be. Keep that summary to 1 or 2 sentences and in simple enough language that everyone in the core group understands exactly what is meant, in order that they can then cascade that to the remaining workforce. If the core group can't describe the changes that are proposed in a couple of sentences, then there's little chance of convincing frontline employees why the changes are important and why they're necessary. The next step is to communicate the vision. This is absolutely crucial. It's a crucial element of any change management process. You have to get people on board by keeping them informed at all stages. Although part of this will be having regular meetings to discuss the vision and the changes within teams, promoting these elements outside of meetings is essential as well. Don't expect employees to mindlessly convert to the idea of change. Instead, as we've heard before, be open to feedback and host discussions about the topic. Essentially, the goal is to convince the entire organisation that the changes are necessary and why they should happen, thus setting the stage for deploying the changes later. We need to empower others to act on the vision by providing the appropriate support, removing any roadblocks, reducing any friction, and implement the feedback that you've been given in a constructive manner. It is vital to take a moment to assess what might block the change's progress. For example, an employee might not have the skill to use a new piece of technology, or a team might not have the manpower to spare for implementing a new task. Whatever the issue, make sure that it's been limited as much as possible. This can be done by analysing the structure and processes to see if these hold the changes back, and by tackling problems, both human and technical, as soon as they surface. You need to plan and create short-term wins. Divide the ultimate goal into smaller achievable parts and focus on short-term goals to alleviate the pressure. When the time arrives and the changes are being deployed, there must be extra vigilance. The initial motivation to change may start to wane, so make sure that there are short-term wins associated with the changes that allow employees to see how these have impacted positively on their day-to-day working. These short-term wins gives the team a sense of accomplishment and shows them the process working in action, making them more likely to keep up with the changes. Although it's best to plan out these milestones in advance, it's wise to measure the effects of the change as it happens, and then present that data to the team to show them exactly how their performance is being affected. If it's a struggle to think of any milestones, then it's always possible just to reward those who are sticking to the changes and helping to meet the targets. You then need to consolidate the improvements. And here, persistence is key. It's important to persevere while in the process of change management, no matter how tough things might seem, as there's a need to sustain the momentum previously generated for the changes. If successful, persistence can carry far enough that the changes become a new habit before the team loses steam. Take stock of any successes or failures. Look at what happened and what can be improved next time. Beyond that, be sure to set new goals whenever one of the current ones is reached, to continue to let the team have something to work towards. And finally, institutionalise new approaches. As well as managing change effectively, it's also vital to reinforce it and make it a part of both the organisation's documentation and the workplace culture. Set that change in stone. Aside from updating any formal processes to reflect the new change, the success of the change must be promoted in order to help the team to endure going forward. For example, one great way to cement a change is to announce and recognise the original coalition team and their contributions to the final product. This highlights their interaction in the change and the willingness of management to hear feedback and the change in itself as a good thing. Let's look now at the fourth of these theories, which I'm presenting to you today. Nudge theory. Nudge theory is a concept that more commonly finds use in behavioural science, economics, and political theory. But it can be applied to change management in organisations and businesses as well. Nudge theory is odd, in that it's really just a theory. There's no change management model to be had, but instead a mindset and tactic which can be used to frame proposed changes in a more attractive and effective manner. Nudging someone or encouraging and inspiring them to change is the basic essence of this theory, and more effective than trying to enforce change in a traditional sense. So, instead of telling employees what to do and how to change, the way is paid for them to choose to do so by themselves. The trick is knowing how to present these nudges. Nudge theory is not only helpful in exploring understanding existing influences, but also in explaining them in order to either eliminate them or change them to the extent where positives may begin to be derived. Some of the core aspects of nudges are indirect, subtle, open-ended, educational, backed up with evidence, optional, and open to discussion. However, just as for a set method, the theory is a little vague, since it appears to be more of a tool to use with another, more structured change model. The basic principles that need to be followed when nudging changes will look very, very familiar. First of all, clearly define the proposed changes. As with any other model, it's vital to clearly define the changes that you are proposing. The ultimate goal with this method is not just to deploy the changes, but to do so with the full support of the employees. So to do that, they need to know exactly what they're signing up for. Consider the changes from the employee's point of view. Once the changes have been clearly set out, they need to be considered from the point of view of the employees. Take what's known about the team's culture and structure, along with their responsibilities and skills, in order to gauge their reaction. More importantly, start to think about how the same changes could be achieved in a way that is desirable to the workforce. Use evidence to show the best option. Once the change has been presented to fit with the team's priorities, evidence should be gathered to prove how useful it is. It would be my advice: don't cherry-pick evidence that supports a change. Instead, gather information about the team's current performance and structure, and then compare that with the predicted effects of the change. This will show the employees why change is necessary in the first place, and why a particular suggestion is the best course of action. You need then to present the change as a choice. Would you rather do A, or would you rather do B? In keeping with the spirit of nudge theory, despite all of the evidence gathered, it's inadvisable to force a change on the team and justify it with the findings. This will breed resentment to both the change and the instigator of the change, since no one else has had a say in the matter. Instead, the change should be presented in a way that the team will understand and respond well to, with evidence to back it up, and above all else, as a choice. If the case is being argued well enough, the team will be more likely to back it, and the change will be deployed all the better for it. As with other models, listen to feedback. Whether the changes are accepted or rejected, there's a need to be open to whatever feedback the team may have. It is entirely possible that an effect the change may have was missed. For example, an outside factor, which will help or hinder progress. And nobody will know more about these hidden factors than the team that the change will affect. Letting the team give feedback shows them that they are valued as people and their opinion matters. This, in turn, will make them more willing to give the changes a chance. Both before and during the deployment of changes, it's important to be vigilant about any obstacles and limit or remove them as quickly as possible. If the team uses a new process and immediately hits a roadblock, their enthusiasm for the whole thing is likely to plummet. Instead, make the transition to the new way of doing things as easy as possible by assessing what might get in the way of the change and tackling that issue as soon as possible. Again, talking to the team to help identify these obstacles is a great way to identify ones which might otherwise have been missed. And as we've heard with other models, keep the momentum up with short-term wins. Once some progress has been made on deploying the change, the next step is to make sure that it's maintained. To do this, it's worth planning out some short-term goals and milestones which can be celebrated upon reaching. At the very least, this should keep the new practice going until it becomes the normal routine. Let's look now at the pros and cons of each of those 4 models. Let's start with Lewin. Lewin's model is fantastic if a business needs to drastically change in order to succeed. If it's known that a business requires in-depth analysis and improvements, Lewin's model is a great way to start. It excels at uncovering hidden mistakes which were taken for granted, since every aspect of whatever it is to be changed has to be analysed. If the intention is to carry out any business process re-engineering, or some ingrained mistruths need to be eliminated, Lewin's model is ideal. Unfreezing and analysing processes with this method can show what is needed to be improved and highlight how to let a team adapt. By digging up the roots of the current methods and completely revamping processes and practices where needed, it's possible to pivot an organisation at a critical time in its lifespan. However, due to the scale of the unfreezing process, Lewin's model can be difficult and time-consuming to enact. Now, this is not necessarily a problem, since the changes highlighted are often massive and require a large time investment anyway. But it does mean that using the model for anything less than an in-depth analysis and overhaul wouldn't be worthwhile. Lewin's model also requires a great deal of care to be taken beyond the base instructions to support a team and consider their emotions throughout the turmoil. Massive change runs the risk of alienating employees, since their workflow will be drastically different than before. As such, there's a need to be especially careful when bringing them on board and keeping up their enthusiasm in the refreezing stage. Just don't try to unfreeze and change every minor problem. It takes a lot of time and effort to do so, and if great care is not taken, the disruption can alienate employees. What about McKinsey? Well, this model offers ways and methods to understand an organisation and get a deep insight into the way it works. It shows the weaknesses and highlights the areas that most require attention. This model integrates both the emotional as well as the practical components of change that are important to create ways to enable employees to deal with transition easily. This model considers all parts to be important and equally worth addressing, and thus does not leave out some aspects that some may feel are not important. This model also offers directional factors to facilitate organisational change, thus giving a formidable business plan which is both incredibly strong and yet flexible to further change. Since all the factors are interrelated, though, and interdependent on one another, the failing of one part means the failing of all, and this is the greatest disadvantage of this model. The model is complex compared to others, and differences are not focused upon within it. Organisations that have used this model have experienced more cases of failure, and this too can be considered as a negative associated with it. The McKinsey model is impossible to effectively carry out alone or in a short amount of time, unless the organisation is small with very few employees, as the knowledge required to assess every element of the organisation and the capacity to allocate extra time and resources is unlikely to be present, and these are vital in order to build the overview and assess viable changes. In conclusion, instead of supporting deep analysis and large shifts, the McKinsey 7S model is best suited for those who know they have to change but are unsure how to go about it, and they want to know how they can change for the better. By creating an overview of how coherent and effective the various elements of an organisation are, it's possible to go on to analyse the current situation and draft changes to tackle the problem. In other words, this model is great if an organisation does not know where to start, but if the intention is just to assess the viability of a specific change, it might be best to use a model which has a smaller scope. What about Kotter's 8-step process? It's a step-by-step model that's easy to follow and incorporate. The first few stages of Kotter's theory force an organisation to set the foundation for success by creating a sense of urgency and convincing everyone why change is necessary. This gives the team the drive they need to enact the change, with enough people working on deploying it that it should quickly become standard practice. The main idea behind it is to accept the change and prepare for it, rather than changing itself. Since it's a step-by-step model, no step can be skipped to reach the one after that, and the entire process given in this model can be very time-consuming. While it focuses largely on widespread adoption of changes, Kotter's model is a top-down approach at heart, and therefore runs the risk of alienating employees by just telling them what to do. This is likely because the majority of Kotter's experience came from working with large top-down companies, but still, it can be an issue for companies who rely on a more collaborative setup. For anything other than a large corporation, having some kind of back and forth is vital for giving context on changes from varying points of view, and for having employees adapt to the change at all. And finally, let's look at the pros and cons of nudge theory. This theory helps employees realise the importance of the issue and lets them choose the solution. This makes them more motivated to see it through. Giving them that choice also promotes a stronger bond with the instigator, which can extend into greater loyalty and lower employee turnover rates. Nudge theory has many things in common with other change management models and theories, none the least of which is the need to forestall obstacles, listen to feedback, and plan short-term wins. But it's its focus on how the change is perceived by employees and on encouraging them to adopt it that sets it apart. This makes nudge at least a great supplement to more formal approaches. And what this theory mainly seeks is to work on the management as well as the understanding of many influences on human behaviour that lead to changing people. And what this theory says is that choices must be designed in such a way that it can be aligned with the way people think and decide. Compared to other theories, nudge theory is more sophisticated in its approach, and it's radically different from other ways of transitioning. The theory eliminates traditional change methods like punishment enforcement and direct instructions. One of the main benefits of this theory is that it considers the differences in feelings, opinions, and knowledge of people, and also takes account of the reality of the situation as well as the characteristics of human nature and behaviour. It thus minimises resistance for employees of a company and is very well adapted and applied in several industries. However, by itself, nudge theory does not provide a model capable of analysing, managing, deploying and maintaining change, hence why it serves best as a supplement. Also, because of having to be used alongside another method, the extra time and effort involved in providing attractive choices for employees can be staggering and impractical for larger companies. Nudge theory also suffers a little in terms of its predictability. While it's possible to improve the landscape for the changes, the choice ultimately has to lie with the employees, which can make the outcome uncertain. The lack of specific, actionable instructions, along with the time and resources nudge requires on a large scale, means that it's best to combine it with another model, which follows a set structure. That way, it's possible to have a specific action plan while getting a large amount of support from the team. I'll leave you now with some poignant food for thought, which puts in a nutshell what I've alluded to from the start. Change management is about process and people, but really it's just about people and their processes which work for them.
Modern organizations face constantly varying market conditions, customer demands, technologies, input costs, and competition. They must adapt to these shifting forces to avoid being eaten up. Change management is managing the impact that these crucial adaptations can have on an organization's people. 4 typical responses to change are the critic who opposes the change, the victim who panics, the bystander who ignores the change, and the navigator who's empowered to work with changing circumstances. The challenge for managers is to help people become navigators. Here's some things that we know that help this happen. Number 1, communicate the threat of not changing. Number 2, where possible, involve your team in decision making. Number 3, minimize uncertainty. Number 4, celebrate successes in moving towards the goal. Number 5, keep explaining why we're changing. Remember that when there's an information vacuum, people often assume that managers are plotting terrible things. So number 6, be as transparent as possible. To summarize, organizations must continually adapt in order to survive. To create change navigators, communicate the threat, involve your team, minimize uncertainty, celebrate positive shifts, and be as transparent as possible.